But in that final week, you know, there were a couple of unforced own goals. I mean, the classic one being the tombstone.
Yeah.
I just looked at that and thought, I cannot believe that meeting after meeting after meeting of special advisors will have come up with that, and nobody will have said this will be ridiculed the moment it hits the media.
Do you think Miliband surrounded himself with advisors which reflected his own views rather than having somebody who would challenge him?
Yeah, I do, and I think also that we definitely have the brightest generation of politicians across all parties. You know, there is a kind of thing that says Maggie made them all middle class. Well, with right to buy, yeah, I've got some time for that, but we did as well, and rightly so. We gave working class people access to good healthcare, comprehensive education. So, you know, anyway, that's where I am now.
Yeah.
So,
well, I've started recording it anyway.
Have you? Are we recording?
Yes.
I didn't know this. I deny everything I've just said. I didn't say that. I surely didn't say that.
What I wanted to ask you was, what did you think about the campaign as it went along? I mean, it was a very vigorous campaign, more vigorous than the one in South West Herts, but his was pretty vigorous too. But you got quite a lot of people working, didn't you?
I think we did. I think we had a good local campaign. I felt from the off that if I was going to stand as a candidate, I was going to put my heart and soul into it, because if there's one phrase that I hate in modern politics, it's the concept of the paper candidate. I also felt that we could do well in the seat, and okay, we put the vote up significantly, and we re-established Labour in second place.
That's right.
But I would not be telling the truth if I didn't say we did nowhere near as well as I had hoped we would. And, you know, there are legitimate debates about that. Some of those clearly are about the National Party's campaign, and some of them about our own campaign. But I think it's really interesting, for instance, that some think that everybody told us we had no chance on, which was to put the notion of putting the heart back into Hemel at the centre of all we said and did. But and as the physical embodiment of that campaign for a new pavilion, hey presto, last couple of weeks, what is the Gazette full of? And you know, and many others have worked on this, and this is emphatically not simply a party campaign. And I'm not saying that, but I think we really struck a chord on those local issues. I think that brought people in. I made a number of fantastic friends, many of which I'm still in touch with, and I did feel and do feel that a seat that we lost a decade ago by less than 500 votes, and a seat that we held with big majorities in 2001 with a big majority in 97, and held with a bigger majority in 2001, I don't think Labour can ever afford to think of the Hemels of this world as unwinnable, because the day that we do, we give up on much of the South, and we give up on aspiring to majority government. This time it wasn't a B, but we made some progress. I think that there is a danger that when an area has any kind of affluence, you know, and when it has been Conservative for a couple of terms, it's very easy to get fatalistic and defeatist about it, and you know, over a period of time you produce the self-fulfilling prophecy that is unwinnable, and I'm sure that, and I know that there were colleagues who thought we couldn't win, and maybe most of them thought we couldn't win, And if one looks at the results, they were, you would argue they were correct in their judgment. But there is no point in politics without optimism.
No.
There is no point in politics without spirit. I actually think that in this election campaign, looking at the outcomes and also looking at what we were finding on the doorstep, because I was pretty much a full-time candidate from the end of February.
Yeah.
It was very positive until the last week. And I think that, and this is something I've reflected on, in the last week, there were a series of national questions that came through that it was very difficult to address. And of course that begs the question, if you have fought a deliberately local campaign, and I did fight a deliberately local campaign for two reasons. I felt, first of all, one thing that Mike Penning has established in the constituency, and I would have to say to his credit, is a strong personal following.
Yes.
And if you're fighting somebody who has a strong personal following, you have to convince people that you will be personable, approachable, and so forth as well. So I think there was no option there. In some sense, that's a credit to Mike, but I think that was important. I wouldn't want to represent people in another way anyway, but that was part of my motive. The other was that the policy offer from the party nationally, I think, was insufficiently balanced to win in what I would call relatively affluent working class and lower middle class communities. In those communities that have been the great beneficiaries of the great innovations of the post-war Labour governments. Good healthcare, NHS, comprehensive schooling. These people now have their children at university.
Yeah, they do.
These people have often been promoted into managerial and leadership positions. I still feel they're Labour people at their core. I think if you look at the Hertfordshire towns, every one of the Hertfordshire towns, either the Hertfordshire new towns like Hemel and Stevenage, or longer established towns such as Watford, their population has moved an awful lot of it. A lot of people who moved into these areas did so in the interwar and post-war period, in particular in the 1950s. Classic study of Luton, which is only up the road, by two sociologists, Goldthorpe and Lockwood, called The Affluent Worker, which looked at the politics of these of aspirant Luton car workers. The people who were settling in Hemel at the time, very similar. They were aspirational, they were hard-working, they saw opportunities, they had the courage of the migrant because they moved from elsewhere. But one thing I think is really important is that very, very often they moved effectively into what we now call social housing. Now, the fact that they might have now bought those homes, or the fact that they might now have moved into other homes in the area and have their own property, I think that what Labour failed to do nationally for these kinds of area was to offer something to the very people who've been the beneficiaries of Labour governments in the past. People who have risen on the tide. And our job is not to simply open opportunities for working class people so that they go off and become conservatives. We have to find a way of retaining that support and building on that support, and we haven't. I think that was the one thing that the 97 government, the Blair governments, and indeed John Smith and Neil Kinnock and all of those who worked to take us out of the malaise and party battles that were the 1980s.
It was very nasty that time.
Yeah.
Very nasty.
And you know, so I think we've lost mass appeal. And while we were absolutely right on the bedroom tax and on non-doms, etc., you know, everybody I met who was affected by the bedroom tax, you know, I was absolutely convinced this was completely the right thing to do.
Mm.
But I met a handful of people in that position during the campaign. And, you know, so I think it was Phil Collins, the Times columnist, rather than the Genesis drummer, who I strongly believe they're not the same person, you know, who said Labour had a message that talked about and was critical of, and often rightly, the top 5%, and talked to the bottom 5%, and didn't say anything to people in the middle. And, you know, that I think is the problem of a conventional left-looking position for the party. So the question is, what does a progressive left position that captures the aspirations of people in Hemel, people in Watford, people in Stevenage look like? And I suppose the short, cheap answer might be to say, oh, it looks like New Labour. But of course we know the problem, with hindsight, of that was too many others of our long-standing supporters felt that we sold too much away at that point in terms of our, you know, our value positions and all the rest of it. So we need a new progressive left that actually, you know, doesn't say you're going to be hit by taxes if you happen to live in London and your property goes up in value, but does say we will be utterly intolerant of inequality, of injustice, that we will fight for good governance in our schools and in our health system, that might, for instance, I would argue, ought to prioritise not public ownership but public control. That builds a citizen society, not a consumer one, and so on. I don't think we had anything to say on that. And I think also on substantive areas. I mean, for instance, on education, and I've written a piece for Progress on this, and I think I've alluded to it in a New Statesman piece. On education, we had almost...
Recently, is this for Progress?
We've had almost nothing. We had almost nothing to say. Now, as an educationalist to my core, I found that really frustrating.
Yes.
And I found myself sitting with the other candidates, all of us, before the hustings that were organised by the A-level citizenship students at one of the at Adeyfield school. With the head, and you know, he I think, you know, was interrogating us absolutely rightly. He ought to interrogate people about stand in front of his students and his parents. And he said to me on Labour's position, he said, so School Standards Commissioner, is that it? In terms of Labour's policy position on education? And you know, with the exception of the stuff on tuition fees, it was. We didn't have anything to say. He's the party who established comprehensive education. This is the party who developed the concept of you know, kids from ordinary backgrounds going to university. We had nothing to say on education, and nothing to say on a number of other areas. So I think, you know, that was difficult. I do think that while we got real traction and support, and I think we won, you know, we clearly didn't win the war, but in some senses I think we won a series of battles on the ground in terms of visual presence as a campaign. You know, driving around the car with writing all over it and microphones on top and so forth. And I think that drew support. But nationally, in that final week, I think that the Scottish message, which was a piece of electoral genius but utterly untrue, the red herring of
Mm.
Labour's relationship with the Scottish nationalists absolutely murdered us.
Mm.
People said, we're worried about this.
Mm.
And, you know, of course, who was the first person that David Cameron met with after the election? Nicola Sturgeon. Why? Because the Scottish nationalists are now so established in Scotland that you cannot govern the UK without being in a coalition, admitted or not, with them. And that's the position. So, but the Scottish message murdered us. I think it gave UKIP a late benefit. I thought they, you know, fought a weak campaign nationally. I think Farage fought his weakest campaign so far. And actually, you know, I think they were expecting to do much worse locally. In fact, I have that on fairly good authority. And I think they got a real boost that came from our voters switching to UKIP on the Scottish question late on. I think the so-called tombstone, the engraving of our ungrammatical and woolly pledges onto a piece of stone. I mean, the last thing I'd be trying to do is remind people about pledges like that. They were poorly written, they were poorly thought out, they did anything but roll off the tongue. You know, if you look at 97, they were short enough for every one of them to fit on a mug or a table mat or whatever. Right? These were, the manifesto was impenetrable. It was badly written.
50 pages
badly
long,
laid out. It looked low budget in every way. I think the engraving on stone, I mean, as soon as I saw it, I just could not believe that room after room of special advisor and meeting after meeting of special advisor and the leadership team could have believed that that wouldn't be ridiculed. So I think that was a massive unforced own goal. I think Ed had a good campaign up to that final week, but got hammered in the final TV debate. And
what about his forgetting to mention in the conference about the deficit?
Well, I mean, you know, that's...
At the time, I thought, well, we know that we're in favour of cutting back the deficit. It's a given.
There wasn't...
but nobody else thought that, did they?
No, but the error there... I have a bee in my bonnet about this, if I'm perfectly honest. You know, this is what happens when your political class is made up of people who almost entirely have done nothing else or worked outside the political bubble. You know, most of them have not developed experience in the outside world. The issue was not, you know, I coach public speaking, and one of the things I say to people is it never matters what you forget to say, because actually you're the only person who knows that you've forgotten. And what someone does when they come off the stage is they say, it could be a wedding speech or whatever, they say, oh, I didn't mention, you know, Auntie Moll or the incident in the park or whatever it may be. Actually, nobody really, maybe Auntie Moll knows it, maybe she doesn't, nobody really notices that. The error was that some young special advisor, when asked why Ed didn't mention the economy because it had been in an earlier draft, he said he'd forgotten it. Now, I do not believe in taking people outside and shooting them, but I'm sure there are some people who could have made an exception for that individual, because frankly, that was the problem. It was that we told the world Ed forgot. It wasn't that Ed. People forget stuff in speeches all the time. And there was a perfectly reasonable line on that, which was, you know, look, we're talking about the economy all the time. Ed Balls is talking about the economy. Chuka Ramuna's talking about the economy. Actually, I wanted to focus on some of the other questions. But once the cat was out of the bed, that wasn't good. It was a major own goal. I thought Ed did really well to recover from it. And I'd done a little bit of work with Ed Miliband when I led a charity called the Citizenship Foundation, which I did for many years. A genuinely good man in every sense of the word, But you know, I'm not convinced that he found being leader of the party.
That leads me to another
easy
question. You're just complaining then about the people who never had proper jobs. You had a proper job. Tell us what you do and what you did.
Well, I'm a teacher by background and by profession. My wife's a head teacher. I went on to work in school improvement as an education advisor, and then 14 years ago I became the leader of a national education charity called the Citizenship Foundation, which was established by a Lib Dem peer, Andrew Phillips, chaired at the time by a Tory grandee, Michael Maclay, and I, as a member of the Labour Party since the age of 16, was its chief executive. And you know, this was and is still a very fine organisation led by a guy called Andy Thornton, and Andy
what's
worked
it
with us for
do?
many years. And what we do is promote young people's engagement in society and in what we do. You see, it's still in the veins. Promote young people's engagement in society, in their communities, in politics. We develop their knowledge about about the law and about politics. And we led the campaign, played a key role in the campaign for citizenship education in schools. And virtually every major figure in citizenship education either has worked, helped set up, did work, or is working with the foundation. So that was the space we were in, and that was why I don't like paper candidates, and I don't like talking about things like retail offers in politics, you know. I believe politics is about engaging people, and of course, you know, you may or may not work out from this that I'm less rather than more likely to cast my vote for Jeremy Corbyn. But you do have to look at the fact that it's the non-standard politicians who are interesting people,
Yes.
of left or right. And I talk about the Corbyn factor, which is a combination of Jeremy Corbyn's name and Nigel Farage's name, and I'm sure both of them hate it. But there is a Corbyn factor in our politics. It is, who's the individual who sounds a bit different? Who doesn't look like they've come out of the same mould? And clearly, you know, so you have Farage at the head of one party. Now, I mean, the fact that actually, you know, by origin, you know, it's the other three candidates in the Labour leadership campaign who can claim and have working class roots. But in terms of modern professional politicians, you look down both front benches and you struggle to see anybody who's a Prescott or a Kent Clark. You struggle to see anybody who people believe has done something outside politics. And I think so we've got the best educated group of politicians we've ever had. It's a pity that nearly all of them went to the same few universities, and a very large proportion of them actually did the same course. It's a pity that they all look and sound the same, and that they've worked in remarkably similar think tanks, and they've interned to other MPs on the way up. So I think you end up with a very professionalised politics. So we've got the most educated generation of politicians we've ever had, and the least connected. And that is why, you know, we've seen this massive surge on the one hand on the right in an interest in Farage, which is actually a statement about Cameron's lack of appeal as much as anything. And on the left we see Corbyn for the same reasons. And we can choose to ignore that, or we can turn it into some sort of facile left versus right thing. That would be the wrong reaction. We have, you know...
Come on with your new job, Breslin Public Research or Policy Research. What's that do?
I established Breslin Public Policy 5 years ago when I left the foundation. I left the foundation because I was leading the charity, my wife was leading the school. We were going through the adoption process, and there were some projects that I wanted to pursue and so forth. So I now work independently, and I guess now it's for others to judge whether I have a real job now in the conventional sense. I certainly have a real job in terms of daily school run, and
Well, you're running a business now.
and the business is successful, and we've done some, I think, really valuable work. For instance, with the Office of the Children's Commission on child poverty, with the Bridge Group on widening participation, and with we just produced a series of booklets for young people.
Is that the Bridge Schools? Is that the Bridge Schools when you said the Bridge Group?
No, the Bridge Group is a fantastic organisation. It's an alliance of people concerned about widening participation, which is jargon for opening up higher education to young people from working class backgrounds. I was the first in my family at Goat University. It's absolutely transformative, and if one thing gets my goat, it's a plummy voice on Radio 4 saying there are too many children going to university now, because you can bet your bottom dollar their kids have already been. And they're talking about other people's kids. So I set up the consultancy, and it gives me freedom and flexibility and an income when I'm working, and of course, in that sense, it murders your finances when you do something like run for Parliament, because you run around knocking on doors for 9 months. And
let me ask you another question about this thing.
Anyway, not complaining.
You mentioned Luton and so forth a little while ago. And Luton and Hemel and Stevenage and places like that are all very similar towns. They're technical towns. Lots and lots of quite high-tech stuff in Hemel. It certainly is in Stevenage and Astrium. You know, people make it. They're the branch of Airbus, which makes satellites. And you've got Vauxhall and so forth. That's right. So it really is, as you rightly say, the aspirational working class people.
Well, the study I referred to.
So why has Luton still have 2 Labour MPs and we don't?
I suspect that Vauxhall is a significant part of that story. The study I referred to, which was produced in the 60s, called The Affluent Worker. It was about folk who came from, they migrated from northwestern London, from former pit areas, from the northeast, from South Wales. They were drawn by the prospect of working in the car factories of Luton and the plants that supported that. And of course, one of the things that we know is that it's in those kind of large production settings where trade unionism, for instance, has always been very strong. Now, what those writers, I'm going right back to the early days of my teaching career now, because at the time it was a staple of the A-level sociology syllabus. But what those writers said was that these affluent workers, as they framed them, they were instrumentally collective. They fought for better working conditions and for higher incomes, so that they could consume more of what at the time Galbraith was calling the affluent society. They were not as likely. Their relationship to Labour, and I think this is critical, and the Labour Party and the Labour movement and trade unions, was more about instrumental strength than political solidarity. Right? And of course they didn't, as new towns, they didn't have the heritage of, say, the mining villages.
No.
Right? So and of course that and they're in, at the time, newly built homes with gardens and wider than normal roads on which you can park a car, and if you're making the things all day, why not aspire to own one? And I think what we haven't done enough of as a party is beg the question, what do we do when our former voters, when the parents and grandparents of who could be our current voters become affluent? We just let them go off and be Tories? Do we just say to them, oh, we'll tax you a bit more? You've made it now. So now you're a fair target. Or do we actually find a way of engaging those people so that they always understand that comprehensive education helped them get there, that universal healthcare has been vital to their life chances, that actually, you know, it's we do all rise on the same tide, but you need social policies from a Labour government that creates that, rather than the kind of selfish free for all.
Yeah.
That is the Thatcherite response to the
We've got to watch the
situation.
time, but we've done 38 minutes of this now.
Apologies to all.
No, don't worry. I want to talk to you about the legacy. Okay, the pavilion looks as though it might be part of your legacy, but one of the things that...
It is also, in fairness, sometimes you have a little bit of luck in the campaign.
Yes.
And the little bit of luck we had was that Mike Ridley and others, at the same time as us,
Yes.
completely independently, a group of people who've always been sort of concerned about the arts in Hemel, got a petition out off the ground. And the irony is that our campaign slogan was "Together, let's put the heart back into Hemel," and their slogan was something like, "We need to put the heart back into Hemel Hempstead." Okay, and we and they saw putting the heart back in as the pavilion, and so did we. We kind of Maureen Flint had knew Mike, and people watching Maureen's is a long-standing Labour councillor, amazing Labour councillor, and we got together and we helped promote their petition, and without in any sense calling into the question their political neutrality. So sometimes, and I like to think that the fact we came up with almost the same slogan and one of the same campaign objectives as a significant and broad group of local people tells us we were doing the right thing. So look, I don't mind having I think it would be fantastic if there's a new pavilion. I think there will be a new pavilion, and if somebody in the future thinks that our campaign, not me, but our campaign had something to do with that, absolutely fantastic.
Do you want still to be engaged?
I still am. I'm still engaged in the
Are
group, the all
good.
party, no party
Good.
group that's campaigning for
Yes.
the pavilion. And I've always campaigned on the issues that I campaigned in Hemel. So and I learned so much by doing it. You know,
Yeah.
I think everybody knows I live down the road in Bushy.
Yeah.
And in fairness, I think people were okay about that. But one of the most humbling days I had in the whole campaign was spending a day with Dens and visiting their facilities and going to the food bank and so forth, because and those are issues. That's not a Hemel issue.
No.
I mean, the fact that the number of food banks has quadrupled over the course
That's a national one.
of this, that's a national issue. So I'm certainly going to be campaigning on exactly the same issues, and I'm certainly very happy to continue to support anything I argued for in Hemel in the run-up to the election campaign. We're a few years off the selection of candidates for the next election.
What's your next step after this then? Not just on that, on your political career, if you think you want a political career.
I haven't got a political career. I've partly because of leading the foundation, I have spent, and work now with Breslin Public Policy. I've spent a fair bit of time working with politicians and campaigners of all parties, but on the issues that I would always say are core Labour issues around education and around health, around child poverty, etc. Because one of the great advantages of working for yourself and having your own business is that you do what you believe in and you work on what interests you. Not everybody has that luck or that privilege, and I'm very aware of that. But I've always believed that it's important for politicians to have some sort of connection with, you know, the areas that they represent, the people that they represent. You know, I'm not going to run around the country looking for a safe seat in a place that I've never heard of. But, you know, I've lived in Hertfordshire since I qualified as a teacher, and I regard, in the broader sense, Herts, and in particular kind of southwest Herts and central Herts as home.
So you'd stand again somewhere in this?
I would, if the
Hertfordshire?
opportunity in, you know, the parts of Hertfordshire and London where I've spent, where
So
I've
if the Hemel
lived, or had
Hempstead
my.
you'd stand again, you'd stand again there, would you?
I honestly don't know. I think it's, you know, I'm going to be 5 years older in 5 years' time, and I guess if there's one reflection about political career, is that I've always had an interest. I've been a member since I was 16, but perhaps I should have set out on this road 10 years earlier or whatever. I'm not sure. And the other thing is, and I think this is really important, is that I think that the move to fixed term elections, which was really just about Nick Clegg and David Cameron assuring the public that they'd last 5 years.
That's right.
I think was a major error, because what it means is that nothing gets decided in politics for the final year. You lose virtually a year's lawmaking. Every parliamentarian on all sides that I've spoken to have conceded that. I think also, from the point of view of standing as a candidate, it means that once you're selected, you're campaigning. And you know, I took my business activities down to a couple of days a week at the end of October, and I pretty much you know, stopped completely at the end of February, and that's a hell of a commitment for anybody to make. I'm lucky enough to be able to make that. But before fixed term elections, if you were selected as a candidate, you committed 3 months of your life to trying to get elected, not 12 months. And I'm really worried that it's another thing that will narrow down the number of people who can go into politics. And just a simple question, you know, we have jury service to support our legal system. We have no equivalent to support people's engagement in politics.
No.
Now, I don't think that somebody on anything like the average wage has a hope in hell of being able to afford to be a part-time candidate, never mind a full-time candidate in a general election. I know that one of the candidates or one of the other parties in Hemel withdrew because their employer would not give them any support at all in their attempt to stand for Parliament. And they, I gather, were a public sector employee. I think that's shameful.
Absolutely.
So I think that, you know, so I guess it's been the most fantastic experience. But I felt like I didn't spend anywhere near as much time with my boys over the weekends from October through to May as I ought to. You know, there are those kinds of things. Would I be able to throw, would I feel it was right to throw all that time at a campaign again? It's too early to say. And the truth is, there's several years to go. And I probably need to do a lot of family time between now and then, and you know, earn enough money, and then, you know, if the situation arises, and people are kind enough or bonkers enough to support me, maybe I'll find myself standing in 5 years' time. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's just.
All right. What do you think the Hemel Party should be doing in the meantime?
I think in spite of the fact that I have all sorts of reservations about a model that says pay £3 and you can have a vote, I think it's a really poor model of democracy. I'd actually prefer to go full open primary than that, what it's worth. I think there's and I like the idea of full open primaries, and I'm working at the moment on a project called useyourvote.com that I'm going to get off the ground in the next year or so, which I had to park because it's an all-party campaign. I had to park because I was selected for the Labour Party and couldn't. But as an advocate of people getting involved and all the rest of it, I think although I wouldn't have done it this way, we do have far more people now somehow engaged in the Labour Party than we've perhaps ever had, and certainly had in recent history. And whoever is elected leader, and whoever those people wish to elect as leader, we must work with that energy. Just as in Scotland, it's vital to work with the energy that the referendum campaign created. We must work with the energy that this leadership campaign has created. But we must remember, it's not actually about having the support of everybody in the party. It's about having the support of everybody in the country. And that's the one thing that I think is really important. That we use this as a catalyst to become more outlooking. So what should a local party do? I know that it's people like Lee Whitehall and Luke Sills, who worked with us during the campaign, head boy at King's Langley School, just about to go off to Exeter University. As a result of our campaign, he ended up working in Ben Bradshaw's office for a part of the summer. Fantastic, if we can engage the Luke Sillses of this world, if we can find the people, whether they're £3 sign-ups or new members or whatever they may be.
Is he in danger of becoming a SPAD, though, and a professional politician?
Well, look, if I was, and I've made the criticism, if I was 18 now, I didn't know SPADs existed or think tanks existed or anything else. In fact, I didn't know think tanks existed until the early 90s, when I was running a campaign to keep a psychiatric hospital open, not out of self-interest, but because my father was a patient there, in Shenley, and where they had a vital dementia unit.
Uncle went there.
And myself and another guy, Jim Stone, co-led the Shenley campaign, and we achieved a lot in terms of changing the way people were relocated out of those hospitals, the kind of facilities we put in place and all the rest of it. But I didn't know think tanks existed until I got invited to a thing by an organisation called Demos to talk about mental health care. It was a secret world. It's less secret now. If I was 18 now and thinking of going into politics, and given that I joined the Labour Party at 16, that's where I was, of course I'd be looking at SPAD. But what I'm saying is, it shouldn't be the route into politics.
No.
We ought to look seriously about whether we expect politicians to be pre-qualified by outside activity before they enter politics. I've spent most of my professional career arguing for more youth voice. There's just a possibility that there's only one area where we've got, in a sense, it's not so much youth voice, but kind of 20-something voice, and it's professional politics, where actually it'd be really good to hear a few sort of people in their late 30s and their 40s, and people of the age that, when you used to go into politics. Look at what John Prescott did before he went in. Look at what Ken Clarke did, highly successful QC. We're not getting those people into politics now. So would I take that route now if I was an 18-year-old? Yeah, I probably would. Would I, from a careers point of view, advise an 18-year-old to do so? Yeah, I probably would. Do I think it should be the route or the only route? Emphatically not. Now, if we can build up, back to your question, because, the one thing that I do share with real politicians. I take a long time to answer questions. Sometimes answer several other ones along the way. Sometimes forget the one I was originally asked. But I think Peter's question was, what should the party do with all these new members? We should energise them. One thing that really, really hacked me off, I don't watch my words there, during the campaign was to continually, members that we were working with and were out on the streets knocking on the door, and it, you know, hacked them off as well, was getting letters saying, go and canvass somewhere else. No, canvass in your constituency, and let's get the kind of energy in every constituency we've got in Hemel, or in every constituency like Hemel. Because I think that if we take the energy of 25% of these new sign-ups and we get them blogging for us, we get them involved in cross-party community campaigns like the Pavilion, we get them right into the local papers. So it's not always, and I'm not knocking them, it's vital, but it's not always the same 4 Labour Party members and the same 4 Tories who write all the letters in the Hemel Gazette. You know, we start campaigning for the next election now, and we bring an energy to the process, and we should, you know, and look, whether I stand in 5 years' time or not, and when I stand in Hemel or not, you can have the slogan, together, let's put the heart back into Hemel. Let that slogan be the legacy of the campaign. Let's create a party where there's a whole host of people from Hemel and around abouts who want to be the parliamentary candidate here, right? Probably so that an old duffer like me's got no chance at all. But let's create a vibrant party. Let's not leave it 4 weeks beforehand, and let's talk back to the National Party, because the only thing that they sent me, apart from the impenetrable manifesto and this other ring-bound book that was, you know, 100 pages of useless advice, that should have been the title, they sent me a wall planner, right, with one date filled in on it.
Yeah.
The date of the election.
I have one of those.
Thought, I'm the bloody parliamentary candidate. I know when the election is. It's not a wall planner I need. It's you guys not writing to all the people who might go out and campaign for me and telling them to bugger off somewhere else and campaign. You couldn't make it up. And then you stick all the pledges on the tombstone a week before the election, and hey presto. Anyway, there you go.
With that call to arms, Tony Breslin, thanks very much.